You are about to listen to the full interview with Scott Nelson. Sections of it were originally included in our Sierra Sounds episode. Scott Nelson is a retired cryptolinguist expert in the United States Navy. Scott believes he recognizes elements of some unknown language within the Sierra Sounds recordings, and now is working to transcribe the vocalizations he hears on the tapes. We hope you enjoy.
I'm a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Navy as a cryptolinguist and interpreter of Russian, Spanish, and Persian. And then when I got out of the Navy, I started teaching, and that's what I did for 20 years, teaching those languages, as well as, philosophy and religion, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. You said a cryptolinguist.
Yes.
Could you kind of describe what that is and what those duties entail?
Well, the way I describe it, my actual title was CTI, Cryptologic Technician Interpreter. And, what we were trained to do is to listen into communications.
Mm.
Whatever our target languages were. But also to be able to identify languages that were not, our target language.
Right.
And then to collect it, you sit the cans, what we call sitting the cans, which means you're sitting there with the headphones on, 4-hour stints, 8 hours a day, if not 12, and just collecting what you can. And then going back afterwards and transcribing it, everything you missed.
Right.
So, I did that for 20 years.
And so you were listening to radio. Would you be listening to radio signals, or what sort of transmissions were you listening for?
The human voice on tape. Collecting it on tape and then listening to it afterwards, to transcribe it all.
How long have you personally been interested in the topic of Sasquatch, and what is it that originally drew you to this topic?
I grew up in Morgan, Utah, Ogden, Utah, up in the Rocky Mountains, and I had a lot of friends when I was a kid that were Native American. Yeah, because I lived right next to the Intermountain Indian School, which is the biggest Indian school in the West at the time. And so I'd heard, I'd always heard, what to me were mythologies and, scary stories that my friends would tell, but I never really associated it. And I never really got interested in it until I heard, the Barry Moorhead tapes. I was hearing something that was outside of my paradigm, if you will. Something that was definitely speaking language, but it was not a human being. And I had no clue.
How did you stumble across those tapes? What introduced you to the recordings?
I was just, I'm a teacher at a military academy, military college. My son Stephen had the day off from school, but we did not. So he came to school with me. And after school, we were sitting in my classroom, and he had a project to write a paper on something of his interest. So, like all 12-year-old boys, right? He said, Dad, I want to do either on Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or UFOs. So take your pick. So he said, okay. So he said Bigfoot. So we started Googling Bigfoot. And this was, to me, Google was very new to me. So we were finding stuff. And he says, Dad, what do you think Bigfoots sound like? And I remember some B-grade movie from the 70s. I know let out some hoop or holler. And he said, Dad, I don't think that's what Bigfoot sound like. I says, okay, well, let's Google it. So I literally Googled Bigfoot sounds. And that's when I came up on Ron Moorhead and and his tape recordings, him and Al Berry's tape recordings.
Yeah, and maybe for people who don't know what those are, maybe kind of give a description of what those recordings are and what you hear on them.
Of course. Okay, the Barrymore Head tapes were recorded in 1972 and 1974. They captured stuff that was never before or since, to my knowledge, ever captured. Well, we actually have 2 or 3, at least, Sasquatches, communicating with each other. Or I'm sorry, I don't know what they were. I can't say, I didn't see them. I can't say it was Sasquatches or frickin' aliens or angels or demons, for that matter. All I can say is whatever it was not a human being, but it was communicating in a language, okay, which took me out of my paradigm. So
it makes sense.
So I guess you could say that's how I got started. And then it wasn't long before I got a hold of Ron through some detective work and went out to visit him and Al in California. And they immediately had a connection with him. Seemingly, they knew the whole time that these creatures were trying to communicate in a language. But they had never found anybody that could corroborate that. Or, and I showed up, I showed up kind of for dinner in Mariposa, California, and there's Ron and Al. I meet them for the first time, and they said, man, we've been looking for a guy like you for 35 years. And I was never looking for anything like this. But so anyway, we hit it off right from the start. And that's where our collaboration began.
After your analysis of the tapes, what was your initial conclusion regarding what you were hearing the very first time you listened to them? Did you immediately think like, wow, this is unbelievable, this has got to be something I don't know? Or did you think this could be language, I need to listen to it a few more times? Or was it crystal clear to you that first time?
I walked out of there, with my son that day at school. And I walked out, and I was kind of in shock. And my son Stevie's like, Dad, what's wrong with you? And I said, but almost immediately there were 3 things, and this is what I always, present. But there were 3 things that I concluded almost immediately, and that was I was hearing a language. Number 1. Number 2, it was not a human being. And number 3, it was not fake. I had, I'd spent a career in the Navy being trained on deceptive communication techniques by other countries, right? In those days, 1972, 1974, there's no way that anybody could have faked that. I was well aware that the first time listening through that, I'm thinking, could this be fake? I was well trained in, the Russian deceptive techniques. And there's no way the Russians could have done that. Or anybody at that time. So, anyway, that was one of the 3 things. It's a language, it's not a human being, and it's not fake. These tapes are not fake.
So you say that you feel like you can recognize a language in it. Do you think it's ever possible, given the recordings that we have in hand, to decipher what is being said in there? Or do we need more samples for that to be possible?
Yes, we need more samples. That was Ron's, that was his constant mantra to me. The 8 expeditions we took up on that mountain, together. He was always like, Scott, can't you just tell me what they were trying to say to me? Because he knew they were trying to talk to him. He said, just tell me what they were trying to say. I said, well, I can't do that. All we can do, the best we can do is prove that whatever the hell they were using a language every bit as complex as our own.
So I guess that's a good question for you then, is how do you, when you hear these recordings, what is it specifically that makes you certain that it is a language and not just animalistic noises?
There's so many things that we would call a characteristic of language, okay? And virtually all of them are evident in the Barry Moorhead tapes. Okay, they have three main, really, elements of language. It's function, properties, and then elements of language. Okay, I can list these off: thinking, intimidation, persuasion, instruction. Okay, emotional expression, even ritual. All of those functions of language are evident in the Barry Moorhead tapes. I mean, from that point, the properties of language, that it's semantic, that it's learnable. We have adults, what we are pretty sure are adult beings speaking to a younger being using the same morphemes, exchanging morphemes, exchanging query inflection with instructional inflection. So all the other things, all the other properties of language, you have to assume they're part of it because it's so creative and arbitrary and open. These are all properties of language that are very clear.
You mentioned that you had a chance to go out to the camp with Ron Moorhead a few times. Can you tell me about that experience? And did you encounter anything while you were out there?
I've been up there total of about 8 times with him. And, I'm one of the few outsiders ever invited up there, me and my son, Stephen. And then one year my daughter, Amber, went up with us. But it's a unique place. Yes, we had some strange things happen. And then we've been up there for times when absolutely nothing happened. And you could tell. I mean, we'd go in and you could tell whether they were around or they wouldn't. You could somehow feel it. And then, I mean, you talked to Ron, right? You've asked Ron these questions about weird stuff that happened up there.
Yeah, I don't think we actually touched much on your encounters, though.
God.
I focused more on his original encounter, so I'd love to hear anything while you guys were up there, if you have any.
Did Ron tell you about the time I saved his life, the very first time we went up there?
No, he didn't. I would love to hear about that.
Oh, my God. You're kidding me.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
No, we went up there, my God, we prepared for this for months. And we went up there with the right horses. We got halfway up, and something was impeding the horses. Ron tumbled down the mountain 3 times on the back of a horse. And thank God I had the best horse of the bunch. And he saved my life, I figured. I was above Ron. I saw Ron get bucked off this horse into some rocks. I thought he was dead.
Oh, my God. That's terrifying.
But the point of this is that something was impeding the horses from continuing on. So anyway, our first attempt to go up to the camp, for him to show me the camp, ended up in me having to get him down off the mountain along with the horses.
Oh my God. It's a good start.
Oh yeah.
I believe he mentions this. This is in his book, right? I read it. I remember reading about this. Yeah, I remember reading about this encounter.
It better be.
I think you made it in the book. Don't worry.
Or else I'll be writing my own book. All right. The next time we attempted it, and the first time we actually made it up there, my son Stephen, who was about 12 years old, went up with us. It was just me, Ron, and Stephen. And I mean, this is a vigorous trip. I don't know if Ron told you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ron rode the horses up, and me and Stephen climbed the whole way. And once we got in about the same time. Once we got into camp, we barely got the packs off of us, and we're sitting around, totally exhausted. And directly, I would say 40 yards directly west of our camp, as the sun was going down in that direction, directly west of our camp, we hear a very loud cowbell. and it just goes, but not like in a cowbell. It just goes ding, 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 very loud. And we all
kind of musical,
huh?
Almost music. It sounded musical.
Oh, yeah, I guess you could say that, but it sounded like a cowbell. And I goes, we all set up, and I look at Ron, and this is, remember, directly west as the sun was setting. And I was, Ron, what, excuse my language, what the fuck was that? He goes, oh, that was a cowbell. I said, Ron, that was no fucking cowbell, right? He goes, I look at Steve, and he says, dude, that's all, he says, that was a weird cowbell, right? This is what made me later understand what Ron had gone through all his life, being ridiculed for the stuff that he was saying, because he had become so callous that he was not going to attribute anything to Sasquatch or anything unusual if if there was any possible other explanation.
Right.
And
yeah, and you're in the middle of nowhere right now, right?
Oh
I mean, this
God.
isn't. There's not like there's people ringing cowbells anywhere near the camp.
No
That's
frickin'
not
way.
something that happens.
I said, yeah, no. I said, Ron, that's not a fucking cowbell. You know, like, I said, yo. He says, I said, you ever saw a fucking cow appear? He says, yeah, we saw a cow appear once. I says, that was not a cow appear on the top of this fucking mountain. and his cowbell goes ding, ding, ding. And just as we finished that conversation, and Stevie was trying to not look scared, you know, he's trying to be a big guy. You know, just as we finished that conversation, we hear the exact same sound directly to the east of the camp.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, about the same distance. We hear ding, 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 exactly like a cowbell.
Almost like a call and response sort of thing.
Oh my God, it was, yeah, well, is it Ron, that was a fucking cowbell? I don't think so. I said, you're telling me that a cow ran from 40 yards that direction to 40 yards on the other side of our camp in about a minute and a half, and made the same exact sound without making any sound in between. A cow was running that fast without making a sound with a cowbell. Yeah, and we actually have this discussion up there at the, you know, within the first 5 minutes of, you know, throwing our packs off at the Sierra camp.
Did you end up hearing any vocalizations or anything while you were out there? Was it any footprints or anything like that?
Ron heard one thing, and but we did get it on tape. And here's the problem, and I hope Ron was able to talk to you about this stuff. Oh, otherwise I'm going to be the one that sounds crazy. Whenever they were around, and again, you could feel them, okay? All of our recording equipment. And the first few times we went up there, Ron took his, you know, his video stuff. But every time we knew that they were around, and you would turn on one of those machines, it would immediately drain the battery. The battery, you could actually watch the battery go down. Right. So, I mean, after the first 2 or 3 times going up there, Ron didn't take his video stuff anymore, but we were taking, you know, good Zoom, you know, voice activated stuff up there. If you talk to Ron again, he will testify to this. And whenever we could feel them around, we would turn that Zoom stuff on, and he and I both had the same, you know, equipment. We would turn that on, and you could watch the battery go, you know, ooh. Swear to God, you could watch it drain out. And then we'd be up there for, you know, over a week, other times, and you just didn't feel anything was up there.
Yeah, maybe describe that. You've mentioned it twice, where you can feel their presence. What is that? What is that experience like? Well,
first let me say that when you feel like nothing's up there, the batteries would last for days, 5 or 6 days. We had the best lithium batteries, and so it's weirdly, when you could feel them, the batteries would drain immediately. And you're asking me what it feels like. That's impossible for me to describe. It's good. You have to have me and Ron together talking about, hey, what did that feel like?
Was it a threatening feeling, or was it a
No. I never felt threatened. Not really. I should say after the first time. The first time when the horses were tumbling down, the mountain, with Ron, I felt threatened that time, but no, I never felt threatened when they were around, but just weird stuff happened, but nothing we could ever get on tape. It was almost like it was intentionally, that they knew they weren't going to go on tape.
Yeah, I know that Ron believes that there could be something almost like spiritual about these creatures, something that's beyond the flesh and blood that, would explain some of these experiences that don't quite fit into our expectation for a creature. Do you believe that as well after having those experiences, or do you still think it's a flesh and blood animal that lives out in the woods?
I think that they have abilities that are way beyond us, especially out in the woods. I think the forest, is their machine. People claim that, they don't have culture, they don't have technology. I say, no, bullshit. The forest is their machine. And somehow they've learned to use it, in my mind, to protect themselves, and the number one thing that protects them is elusiveness from us. So certainly they would learn our language, or as much as they could, to understand what we're talking about when we're out there, carrying guns around and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. I mean,
stuff.
do you think that when you hear those recordings, do you hear any similarities to known human languages? Is there any comparison or any words?
I have to speak on that every time I present my study, and that's basically what we would call cognitive or cognatic expressions in the language. Okay, what a cognate is anything that is the same in, like in English, for instance, the same in French or the same in German. Okay, something that is the same in our language that would be the same in theirs. Okay, so I have had probably a couple dozen different native linguists listen to the tapes with me.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of them, whether it be Persian, Russian, Spanish, Japanese. The first guy I played the tapes for was my colleague, Jerry Masuda, speaking Japanese. And he recognized weird inflections. All right? Basically, every person that I've ever played any of these tapes for, no matter what their linguistic persuasion, right, recognized cognatic expressions. What we have to, do you know what pareidolia is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, pareidolia is, it's natural for all of us to recognize, patterns in ordinarily random, expressions or, things in nature. So we have to, because every single person I've ever played them for, recognizes something, that I have to attribute it, a bit of that to pareidolia.
So you mentioned that you feel pretty certain that the vocalizations couldn't be human. You've talked on like why you think it may be language, but maybe could you go a little bit more into detail why you feel certain that it couldn't be made by a human?
When I made that conclusion, I did not know. And remember, I made that conclusion almost immediately upon hearing the tapes, right? Or snippets of them. I had no idea that years and years before, they had already been presented to a Dr. Kurland, and which you must have talked about with Ron. And he had already, and he was not a language guy, he was a sound guy. And he had already come out and says, no, these cannot have been made by a human being. Well, when I come out and said, these are not made by a human being, that's nothing scientific. That is entirely based on my professional experience. And as far as I still know, I know maybe probably two guys that have listened to more human voice on tape than I. And that would be one of my colleagues in the Navy and the guy who trained me, Ralph Blessing. Yeah, that had nothing scientific about it at all. When I decided, this is not a freaking human.
I mean, the tapes are so fascinating because it goes between sounding so animalistic and then moves so fluidly into what sounds like language. Within like a split second, it just transitions.
Oh yeah.
It's never heard anything like it. So it definitely catches you off guard when you hear it. Have you ever heard anything like these tapes? Have you ever heard any other recordings that you think are comparable?
Paul, over the years now, I have accepted submissions from, now probably a couple hundred people that had sent me different tapes that they wanted me to listen to, right? And I would say, unfortunately, about half of those are all fake.
Yeah.
There are people trying to, test me out or challenge me, but I have to say, no, that's fake. Either you are faking these or someone is faking you. So, but in all of these submissions that I received, I would say probably about 3 that would be, and they were very quick, and I only picked 3 because they are of the quality of the Barry Moorhead. The Barry Moorhead tapes are of such high quality. You can hear so clearly everything that's being said. And so I probably heard about 3 different recordings that were very quick, but would come from something like this Sierra being.
You mentioned you got to meet Al Berry as well.
Yes.
Could you kind of just describe Al Berry as a person and like how he struck you as a journalist and his involvement in the story?
To me, he was a genuine guy. And I think he just didn't want to admit. I almost think like he felt it was his duty to be a skeptic. Because, he's a journalist and a scientist. And I think Ron felt like that too, at first. When me and Ron first got together, I think Ron, like, again, every weird thing that happened up on that mountain and down below the mountain, Ron was being very skeptical about it. And I think that, again, came from 30+ years of being ridiculed. Here we got, pillars of the community, a journalist and, an entrepreneur. And they're being horribly ridiculed all their lives. You can see why they both wanted to be as skeptical as possible.
Since your involvement, have you faced any of that on your side, or has it been pretty? Have you not had to deal with as much blowback as they have?
I've been in a lucky position where I taught for 20 years after retiring from the Navy, and I could pretty much say whatever I wanted to, even though I worked at a military, college. I never felt constraints of anybody, holding me back from telling the truth. Even when stuff, I will tell you the truth. Ray, for about the first 5 years that me and Ron were together, going to conferences and talking about this stuff. Okay, we had an agreement that we were not going to talk about the weird stuff. Because also at the same time in the Bigfoot community, there's a big, let's not get into the weird stuff.
Yeah.
Push.
Yeah.
Right? And so for the first 5 years, but then it just accumulated. And it got worse and worse, where we finally just looked at each other and says, I think it was down in Hanobia. And we just looked at each other and said, look, we can't, not talk about this stuff. We cannot not talk about the weird stuff. And that's when we really opened up our minds up to the fact that, and Ron will put it in the same way I am doing right now, that there's way more going on than we have any clue.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, I've read a lot of different Bigfoot accounts, and that, a lot of these stories do have elements to them that are not what you would expect in a flesh and blood encounter with a bear or something like that. There's always these other aspects to the stories, and people are uncomfortable to tell them. And I think it's unfortunate because it's almost some of these things in these stories, they remind you of aspects of like what you would think of as like a poltergeist or a ghost story almost, and yet it also includes this thing that, for all if you take that outside, it seems like it could be a flesh and blood creature. But I think it's unfortunate that people aren't willing to tell or at least listen to the stories that are not what they're expecting, because I don't think Bigfoot ever is something that you should expect. You need to be open-minded to everything you hear.
Well put.
So I know Ron actually he also spent his time in the 70s. He found footprints in their area. Have you ever seen the plaster cast that he took, or seen any footprints yourself while you were out there?
Not up in the Sierras. I saw some locally here that I thought were footprints, and I made casts of them. But because they were in a weird place at a weird time. But nothing that would not go beyond, human dimensions. Up there, I never saw any, real tracks. There were a lot of other weird sightings, weird, almost apparitions, if you will, but not by me.
Wait, so you met Al Berry. Did you meet anyone else who was around during the time when these recordings were taken? Because
yes, Bill McDowell, good friend of Ron's, still to this day, I'm sure. Bill, it was he and Ron who recorded all of the Moorhead tape, where Alan Berry was up there, in 1972, and got what I refer to as the Berry tape. Then Ron Moorhead and Bill McDowell went up in 1974 and got the Moorhead tape.
Mm.
And Bill McDowell was, I would consider him a friend. I've seen him 2-3 times and hung out with him and Ron.
Is Bill? I heard that somebody may have more tapes that they haven't just gotten around to digitize. Is that Bill McDowell who may have more tapes that aren't publicly available at this time?
Well, Ron originally had more tapes than we have now,
right. Yeah.
And they got burned up in a garage fire. And his only idea is that the only other person that could have copies of those ones that got burned up would be Bill.
Is there? So there's obviously you can listen to the recordings online. Do you know if Ron? Have you heard more?
I think you can. It's hard to listen. You can't listen to all of the recordings.
Yeah,
you can.
That's what I'm
you can listen to little snippets.
Right.
In fact, what I originally heard it on was the BFRO. But they were 1.5 second snippets. or maybe 3-second snippets. But even at that, I could tell what I was hearing. But as far as I know, there's nowhere online where you can listen to all of the tapes. You can hear snippets. All of the tapes, we have over 90 minutes. We have over 90 minutes within, so that's why it took me 4 months to transcribe.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that transcription work you did. What came out of the end of your transcriptions of these tapes? Like, what were you left with?
Well, of course, the work is not done, and I don't think the work will ever be done. The bottom line of what we have with the transcripts is that it's a language.
Do you think that this could one day become the Rosetta Stone for Bigfoot language
of
or
course.
whatever this? Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Of course, something has to.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we'd have to, sit down with them, and have tea, and just discuss exactly what did you mean by this morpheme or this word, That's probably not going to happen.
I have to ask, have you ever heard an animal that you think that could come close to that's not a known animal that could come close to reproducing the sounds we hear on the tape?
Yes. I got asked this question a few months ago on another interview. And I realized the answer to that is yes. There is another creature that can speak in this very close to this way, right? Except for the massive, lung volume, the resonance, and the frequencies above and below the ability of humans. The only other creature on Earth that could speak anywhere near this complex of a language is a human being. So yes, I have heard one other creature that can do this.
From the creature's tone and inflection, are you able to gather any information around what the gist of this conversation or this interaction may be?
Assuming that their life is just like, the average life of a human being, and their family life, it sounds like we got a man and a woman arguing over food, and a kid saying, yeah, I want some too. Inflection-wise, yeah, you can assume all kinds of things. Because they really do sound human.
Yeah, I guess so. You mentioned they do sound human, but you also mentioned that the deep resonance of the voice is something that is maybe
they're not
characteristic of
I
human.
can tell you, yeah, it's been shown that they're not human, but they still sound like they want to be human, or that they should be.
What further work in this area do you plan to do? And do you have any continued plans to continue to research the tapes or to try and capture more sounds to analyze?
Capturing more sounds, of course, is the holy grail. And, I continue to accept submissions from people that have captured what they think is language. Hopefully that'll pan out soon enough. But we have to get the transcripts published, and the whole 90 minutes of the tapes published, so that people can hear it all for themselves.
When do you think the transcripts will be available in the full tapes?
A couple of years. Again, we're still holding out for some miracle that will corroborate everything.
What do you think is the hesitance to put out the full recordings? Is it just without corroborating evidence that by itself it doesn't stand?
Well, there is no the hesitance would be on my part, because I don't, like early on, I mean, we were offered spots on Monster Quest and Finding Bigfoot, and we never accepted any of those because we knew, we'd be highlighted for 10 minutes and then dismissed. And, we're not going to be doing that until we're ready.
Is there anything around the tapes anything that we haven't touched on that you'd be interested in sharing around anything you've discovered while listening to them, or Something that a listener may not pick out with the untrained ear?
There are a lot of little spots on the tapes where you can really kind of get a feel, almost for the personality for them. Okay, like there's one spot where it sounds like the big male. And by the way, there's actually areas on the different parts of the tapes where we think they're referring to each other by name. But in the first part, the big male almost seems to be telling a joke about the humans. And you can almost imagine him saying, "Oh, look at these little hairless apes, you know, how goofy. We could kill them in a moment if we wanted to. Ha ha." And then he almost, and it sounds like he actually laughs at his own joke. Yeah, so that's part of the characteristics of language, you know, the expression of emotion, you know, that all goes into, you know, the overall analysis of it. But, and then there's parts where it's obvious that, to me anyway, where the big female is screaming at the guy, at the male, over something, and then he yells back at her. And I swear to God, it would sound like you and me, to all the audiences that listen to my presentations, right? It sounds like, say to them, like an old married couple. It really does.
You said you think you could even identify that you may hear names in there. Have you been able to isolate what those are? Like what, or how do you know that? Is it because they're repeated?
It's the way it's presented in instructive language, and I can tell you what one of them is. The female might be. There's no way you would ever prove this, unless you sat down and say, "Hey, what is your name?" Right, you know. But it sounds like at one point the big male calls her Crossgut, whatever the hell that would mean.
It almost sounds German.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows?
Let us know if you think Sasquatch could have a language on Twitter and Instagram at @strange_phenom and on Facebook at Strange Phenomenon, all one word. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. Visit www.strange-phenomenon.com for a full list of sources and more episodes. Strange Phenomenon is hosted by Ray Tarara. It's written and produced by RJ Blake and Ray Tarara. Theme music by Tara Monk. Additional music provided by Sergei Cheremizanov.